At exactly 0312 hours local time, on the 7th day of Project Freedom, the Strait of Hormuz became the most dangerous 21 miles of water on the surface of the planet. The USS Gettysburg, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser leading a 4-ship escort formation through the American-charted Safe Passage, was 12 minutes from clearing the chokepoint's eastern mouth. Ahead of her, 2 commercial tankers, the MV Nordic Crown and the Panamanian-flagged MV Celestial Accord, carrying a combined 4.1 million barrels of crude oil that had been trapped in the Persian Gulf for 69 days. Behind her, the Arleigh Burke destroyer USS Paul Ignatius, her SPY-6 radar painting a 400-mile sphere of surveillance across the pitch-black Gulf. On the surface, the picture looked controlled. The mine avoidance corridor had been charted by MQ-4C Triton surveillance drones over the previous 48 hours. F-35Cs from the USS Abraham Lincoln were stacked at 28,000 feet, providing overwatch. AH-64 Apaches were hot on both flanks. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. And that, right there, was the trap. To understand what Iran was about to do, you need to understand the geometry of the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, the navigable shipping lanes are just 2 miles wide. 1 lane inbound, 1 outbound, each barely 1.6 miles across, pressed against the Iranian coastline to the north and the jagged rocks of the Musandam Peninsula to the south. The IRGC had spent 8 weeks studying every patrol pattern, every surveillance drone orbit, every charted mine corridor the Americans had published. And they had identified one catastrophic blind spot. The Triton drones flew their mine survey patterns at 60,000 feet, using synthetic aperture radar to detect the magnetic signature of moored mines on the seabed. But there was one class of mine, the SPY-6, the Triton, and every American sensor in the theater had been calibrated to miss. The Iranian-modified EM-52 rocket-propelled rising mine, reconfigured with a new carbon fiber mooring cable that produced an acoustic and magnetic signature indistinguishable from natural rock formation. 43 of them had been laid in the 6 weeks before Project Freedom launched. Not scattered randomly, placed with surgical precision in a funnel. A funnel whose mouth pointed directly at the corridor the United States Navy believed was safe. The first warning came not from any sensor aboard the formation. It came from a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft flying a racetrack orbit 180 miles to the northeast, monitoring encrypted Iranian naval communications. At 03:14:07, the Poseidon's AN/ALQ-240 Electronic Support Measures Suite intercepted a single 1.4-second burst transmission on a frequency the NSA had flagged 14 days earlier as associated with IRGC mine activation systems. The transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. The signal was encrypted with Iranian Quds standard quantum-resistant cipher, but the mere act of transmitting on that frequency, at that power level, at that time, was itself the intelligence. Lieutenant Commander Sofia Reyes, the Poseidon's tactical coordinator, had been briefed on exactly this signal. She keyed her microphone immediately. "Wolfpack, Wolfpack, this is Seahorse 01. Flashpoint, Grid Kilo 9er, break. IRGC mine activation burst. Confidence high. Recommend immediate course deviation. Break." The response from the USS Gettysburg's bridge was 3 seconds of radio silence. 3 seconds in which the formation continued advancing at 13 knots directly into the funnel. Simultaneously, on the USS Paul Ignatius's sonar display, something changed. The AN/SQS-53C hull-mounted sonar had been passively listening to the seabed since the formation entered the strait. For 6 hours, the acoustic picture had been consistent. Merchant ship noise, residual biological clatter, the low-frequency drone of the formation's own propulsion. At 03:14 hours and 18 seconds, sonar technician First Class Marcus Webb heard something that made his spine go cold. A faint, rhythmic clicking. Not random, precisely spaced. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks. In U.S. Navy anti-mine warfare doctrine, That pattern had exactly one classification code, EM-52, Variant Mine Activation Handshake. The electromagnetic pulse a mine's fire control system broadcasts when it receives an external trigger signal and begins its target acquisition sequence. Webb's hand was on his headset before the fourth click finished. Con, sonar. I have mine activation signatures, multiple contacts, bearing 030 through 060. Request all stop now. But the formation was already inside the funnel. The Gettysburg's navigator looked at the chart. To stop was to sit in a minefield. To turn was to leave the surveyed lane. To continue was to advance into a kill zone that was, in this moment, waking up. What neither the Gettysburg, nor the Poseidon, nor CENTCOM understood yet was that the mine activation was not the main event. It was the trigger. The moment the EM-52s went active, it was the signal for 4 additional IRGC attack packages to execute simultaneously. Package 1. 8 PACAP-3 fast missile boats, each carrying 4 Nasr-1 active radar homing anti-ship missiles, emerged from a cove on Keshem Island's northern coast and accelerated to 52 knots. Package 2. 16 modified Shahed 136 loitering munitions, reconfigured with a new dual-mode seeker combining passive IR and active radar, launched from the deck containers of 3 civilian fishing vessels that had been operating inside the formation's sensor horizon for 9 hours. Package 3. A battery of 4 HY-2 Silkworm anti-ship missiles on Keshem's eastern ridge, their fire control radars activating in sequence, each missile warhead preset for high explosive contact detonation. And Package 4, the one that nobody saw coming, was 40 meters below the surface of the strait, directly under the formation's keel. The IRGC's only surviving Ghadir-class midget submarine, a 120-ton vessel carrying 2 wake-homing torpedoes, had been lying on the seabed in complete battery silence for 11 hours. It was now at 5 meters depth. The torpedo doors were already open. Do you think the US had a way out of this? Comment 1 below, because the answer is going to shock you. CENTCOM's Tactical Operations Center in Qatar lit up like a nuclear reactor at 03:15 hours. On the SPY-6 displays aboard the Paul Ignatius, the threat picture had gone from green to red in 40 seconds. 16 drone contacts, closing at 180 knots from the northwest. 8 fast missile boat contacts emerging at high speed from the north. 4 shore-based missile radar illuminations, painting the Gettysburg an X-band fire control frequency. And below, Webb's sonar still calling out mine activation clicks, now louder, now faster. The mines cycling into their final target acquisition mode. The formation's commanding officer, Rear Admiral Thomas Bryce aboard the Gettysburg, had a decision window of less than 4 minutes. His VLS cells could handle the missile boats. His CIWS could probably handle most of the drones. But the mines could not be shot. They could only be avoided. And the only safe direction was aft, reversing the entire formation back the way it came, back through a 6-mile gauntlet at 13 knots, while every weapon system in the IRGC's arsenal was converging on his ships at Mach speed. He got on the tactical net and said 5 words. "Get me the Growler, now." Call sign Undertaker 1 was an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, crewed by pilot Lieutenant Commander James Park and electronic warfare officer Lieutenant Priya Nair, orbiting at 31,000 feet, 30 miles south of the strait. The Growler was Boeing's most lethal electronic warfare platform. Its AN/ALQ-249 next-generation jammer pods, capable of simultaneously attacking multiple frequency bands with focused, steerable, high-power microwave and electronic attack energy. Undertaker 1 had been assigned to the operation in a passive role, monitoring, recording, cataloging IRGC radar emissions. In the last 40 seconds, that mission had changed. Lieutenant Nair had already built the electronic order of battle in her display. The Nasr-1 fire control radars on the PACAP boats, the Silkworm illumination radar on the Keshem Ridge, the drone swarm's uplink frequency, and, critically, the EM-52 mine network's activation and command channel, which was still transmitting the handshake burst every 4.3 seconds. Nair had a firing solution on every single one of them. The problem was physics. Jamming 8 radar frequencies simultaneously at effective power required the Growler to be within 35 miles of every target it was attacking. Some of the targets were separated by 40 miles of strait. She could blind the missile boats, or she could blind the shore launchers, or she could disrupt the mine command channel. She could not do all three from a single orbit point. She had 90 seconds to solve a geometry problem that had no correct answer. Nair solved it in 62 seconds. The solution was not electronic, it was spatial. She asked Park to roll the Growler inverted, point the nose directly at the center of the strait, and descend at 400 knots, a near vertical dive from 31,000 feet through the missile engagement envelopes of 2 IRGC air defense systems, through the radar horizon of every Iranian targeting sensor in the theater, to an altitude of 200 feet above the water. At 200 feet, the Growler's jammer geometry changed entirely. At low altitude, the AN/ALQ-249 pods could project focused electronic attack energy in a 180-degree arc at near horizontal angles, simultaneously reaching every surface threat in the strait without the curvature of the Earth blocking the beam. It was insane. It was also the only option. Park said nothing. He pushed the stick forward. The Growler screamed toward the water at a dive angle no training manual sanctioned, its airframe vibrating at the edge of structural limits, the radar warning receiver in the cockpit shrieking as 2 IRGC radar systems acquired it as a target. At 03:16:22, an IRGC surface-to-air missile launched from Abu Musa Island, a Chinese-origin HQ-7 system, its infrared seeker locking onto the Growler's exhaust plume. Park pickled a single ALE-47 chaff and flare dispenser pack. The HQ-7 followed the flare into the Gulf. The Growler kept descending. At 03:16:41, Park pulled out at 190 feet above the wave tops. The airframe flexed. The radar warning receiver went momentarily silent. Every Iranian radar had just lost the Growler in the sea clutter. Nair activated the NGJ pods at full power across all 6 simultaneous attack frequencies. The electronic strike began. On the USS Gettysburg's Combat Information Center, what happened next was described by the tactical action officer as watching the threat board perform a factory reset. In 1.8 seconds, the fire control radar illuminations from Keshem Ridge disappeared. The Nazar-1 active radar seekers aboard the incoming missile boats lost their target lock and went into their terminal search mode, executing random spiral search patterns over empty water. 12 of the 16 Shahed drones, dependent on their 900 MHz uplink frequency for navigation commands, simultaneously flew straight, converted by the NGJ's barrage attack into ballistic objects. They arced into the sea in sequence, 3-second intervals, like dominoes falling in a line. The 4 remaining Shahed drones, operating on a backup frequency Nair hadn't fully suppressed, continued inbound. The Gettysburg's CIWSMK-15 Block 1B phalanx opened fire at 1,200 yards and shredded all 4 in a combined 0.9-second burst of 20mm tungsten rounds. Simultaneously, the Paul Ignatius's Aegis Baseline 9 combat system had already computed firing solutions on the 8 PACAP missile boats. Now blind, their fire control radars dead, their Nazar-1s lost. 6 Standard Missile 2 Block 3C interceptors launched from the VLS cells in a 3-second ripple. All 8 PACAP boats were destroyed or mission killed in the next 90 seconds. But the mines were still active, and the submarine was still under their keel. At 03:18 hours, the Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine USS Minnesota, which had been operating in ultra-quiet mode at 400 feet below the strait for the previous 7 hours, received a flash message via extremely low-frequency transmission from CENTCOM. Submerged contact, Gadir class, grid Kilo 9er Alpha, weapons free, defensive posture only. The Minnesota's commanding officer, Commander Elena Walsh, already knew about the Gadir. Her AN/BQQ-10 sonar system had acquired the midget submarine's battery hum 4 hours earlier, when it had first settled on the seabed. She had been tracking it continuously ever since, the fire control solution updated every 11 seconds. The Gadir was 800 yards off the Minnesota's bow, at periscope depth, its torpedo tubes already flooded and open. It had achieved a target solution on the USS Gettysburg. The weapon in its tube was a VA-111 Shkval rocket torpedo, a Russian-origin supercavitating weapon capable of 200 knots over short ranges, fast enough that no surface ship's countermeasure system could respond in time. Walsh had 2 Mk-48 ADCAP torpedoes already programmed and ready, but the rules of engagement required hostile intent confirmation before she could engage a submarine in a ceasefire zone. The Gadir had not yet fired. It was flooding its tubes. It was at periscope depth. It was positioned for a shot. But it had not fired. Walsh had 30 seconds to make the hardest call in submarine warfare. Shoot first and risk being wrong, or wait for the torpedo in the water. She did not wait. She fired 1 Mk-48 ADCAP, not at the Gadir's hull, at the water column directly beneath it, set to detonate at a depth of 60 feet on a near-miss proximity fuse. The detonation created a massive hydroacoustic pressure pulse, not a kill shot, but a decisive physical message. The shockwave hit the Gadir's hull with the force of a sledgehammer striking a tin can. The midget submarine's onboard systems went into emergency crash reset mode, the torpedo fire control computer executing an automatic abort sequence as the shock interrupted the weapons bus. Both VA-111 torpedoes locked in their tubes, safety mechanisms re-engaging. The Gadir's commanding officer, finding his boat momentarily unresponsive, his crew fighting to maintain depth control, made the rational decision. He blew ballast, surfaced, and began broadcasting on the international distress frequency. The Gadir was a spent force. At 03:21 hours, a U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, diverted from its mine surveillance orbit, established visual contact with the surfaced Iranian submarine and transmitted its coordinates to the entire formation. The minefield was still there. The formation was still inside it. But every weapon system that the IRGC had arrayed to destroy the U.S. Navy in the Strait was now silent, destroyed, or neutralized. What remained was the most delicate piece of seamanship the U.S. Navy had attempted since the Second World War, reversing 4 warships through a live mine corridor, at night, with a single P-8A Poseidon as their guide, 1 mine detection pass at a time. The reverse transit took 1 hour and 49 minutes. The P-8A Poseidon flew 17 consecutive mine detection passes. Its AN/APS-154 Advanced Airborne Sensor Radar, painting the seabed in swaths 600 meters wide, feeding real-time mine position updates to the formation via Link 16. The Gettysburg moved at 3 knots. The Paul Ignatius moved at 2. The 2 commercial tankers, their civilian masters on headsets with U.S. Navy quartermasters, moved at bare steerageway, less than a walking pace, following waypoints transmitted every 40 seconds from the Poseidon's tactical coordinator. 3 times the Poseidon called an immediate stop. 3 times the formation held position while the sonar picture clarified. On the second hold, the Gettysburg's keel passed within 11 meters of an active EM-52. The mine did not fire. Its IR seeker was looking for the thermal signature of a fast-moving warship, not a vessel drifting at 1.2 knots with engines at bare idle. At 05:11 hours, the lead element of the formation, the MV Nordic Crown, cleared the western mouth of the strait into the open waters of the Gulf of Oman. The tanker's master, a Norwegian veteran of 30 years at sea, keyed his radio and said one word in English: "Clear." Aboard the USS Gettysburg, Rear Admiral Bryce permitted himself a single exhalation before turning to his tactical action officer. "Get me a full damage assessment on that Growler," he said. "If those two are still alive, I want their names for the citation." Undertaker 1 had landed on fumes at Al Dhafra Air Base at 0318, her port NGJ pod showing stress fractures in the mounting pylons from the dive. Park and Nair were uninjured. The airframe would be grounded for inspection. The mission was complete. In the 43 hours that followed, the geopolitical damage assessment began. U.S. Navy EOD teams, working from USS Sirocco, a mine countermeasures support ship, began the painstaking work of locating and neutralizing the 43 EM-52 mines. It would take 11 days. During those 11 days, Project Freedom was effectively paused for the charted corridor, with commercial traffic rerouted through Omani territorial waters under a separate arrangement brokered in 48 hours of emergency diplomacy. The Ghadir submarine and its crew were released under the terms of a medical emergency provision, returned to Bandar Abbas with a formal U.S. Navy medical escort. Iran's state television claimed the submarine had been on a routine patrol and had surfaced due to a mechanical fault. In Muscat, Pakistani mediators were handed a new U.S. counterproposal. The 14-point memo to end the war now included a specific technical annex on mine disclosure and removal verification. A senior Iranian negotiator, speaking to Reuters in the hallway of a Geneva hotel, called the annex workable. Whether that adjective translates into a signed agreement, whether 43 carbon fiber mooring cables and one Growler dive at 190 feet above the water become the footnote that ended a war, or the opening chapter of its next phase, is a question that 335 million Americans and 8 billion people dependent on the oil flowing through that 21-mile channel will be watching in real time. Because the mines are still there. EOD has found 31. That means 12 are still unaccounted for, and the next convoy leaves in 48 hours. What would you have done if you were Commander Walsh? Fire first or wait? Comment below. And if you think the ceasefire holds through the end of May, comment 1, because the next move belongs to Tehran.